Welcome to Connect at 51, an online Bible study from C3 Church Manhattan. This video has been made to stimulate thought and discussion so that you can get together in a group, watch the video until you see a question screen like this, then pause and share your answers with your group. So the first question to start with is this: what doors have closed for you and how did it make you feel? Some of you may have described closed doors to jobs, relationships, purchases, or travels. And typically there's a negative emotion associated with closed doors. But as we heard on Sunday, this is not always the case. So with that in mind, let's read together Nehemiah 13, where we read a situation when Nehemiah, the governor of Judah, orders the closing of the gates to Jerusalem. In those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys, together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Therefore I warned them against selling food on that day. People from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem on the Sabbath to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this wicked thing you are doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same thing, so that our God brought all this calamity on us and on the city? Now you are stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath." When evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gate so that no load could be brought in on the Sabbath day. Once or twice, the merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem, but I warned them and said, "Why do you spend the night by the wall? If you do this again, I will arrest you." From that time on, they no longer came on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. So what do you think the book of Nehemiah is all about? Nehemiah is set 2,500 years ago after Jerusalem has been destroyed and the people have been exiled for nearly 70 years. The book of Ezra, which is kind of a prequel to Nehemiah, describes the rebuilding of the temple, and Nehemiah is an account of the difficult process of rebuilding the city walls. By chapter 13, the walls have been rebuilt, and we catch a glimpse of what life was like inside the rebuilt capital city. So what is so bad about merchants bringing in all their goods into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day? The fourth of the 10 Commandments was to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. The Sabbath was a day dedicated to God where God's people ceased any kind of work. This observance of the Sabbath was a sign of the covenant between God and his people. You could almost consider it like a pledge of allegiance to God, that those that remembered the Sabbath were demonstrating that they were God's people. And to forget the Sabbath was to turn your back against God. Nehemiah goes so far as to state that their ancestors desecrated the Sabbath and brought calamity to the city. So he orders the doors to the city to be closed and stations armed guards at the gate. Essentially, he enforced a citywide stay-at-home order. So how do you think people felt about this order? We can catch a glimpse in society today about how people react to new rules. Take, for example, face mask orders in this past week. While many comply, there's always a part of society that will aggressively oppose the new rules. I would imagine that Nehemiah would have faced the whole spectrum of responses, from those applauding the strong leadership to others protesting the infringement on their freedom. I'm sure it was a tough decision for Nehemiah, and it would have been very controversial at the time. In many ways, his decision is similar to many tough decisions being made right now about what doors, borders, and businesses can be opened or closed. As we consider this and Nehemiah's own position, ask yourself this question: when is closing a door the wise decision? We often associate closed doors as a negative. However, it really depends on what's on the other side of the door. If, for example, a giant lion is on the other side of a door, a closed door is for your protection. Conversely, an open gate here will lead to destruction. Nehemiah recognizes that if the gates of the city remain open on the Sabbath, then people will stray from God and calamity will follow. So Nehemiah does the difficult thing, maybe even the unpopular thing, and closes the door so that the people can draw closer to God. For many of us, closing a door might be painful or even hard, but it might be very necessary if we are going to grow closer to God. So for Nehemiah, in order to enforce this as an ongoing policy, the Levites are commanded to guard the gates. So the next question is this: who are the Levites and how does this relate to us? The Levites were one of the 12 tribes of Israel that were not given a land to live in, but rather were spread throughout all of Israel and were responsible for the religious duties with the priests. In addition, they served as musicians, gatekeepers, guardians, temple officials, judges, and even craftsmen. In 1 Peter 2, Peter describes all Christians as a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So just as the Levites were guardians to the gates of Jerusalem, we as Christians have that same responsibility to guard the gates that God has given you authority over. In Matthew 16, Jesus declares, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Jesus has given us the keys to the kingdom. We are guardians of gates, and these may be gates to justice, gateways to healing, creativity, freedom, or even a gate to mercy or righteousness and peace. Conversely, he may have given you authority to shut the doors that lead to injustice, hatred, violence, addiction, and strife. He has given you authority to open and close, to bind and to loose. So what gates are you opening and what doors are you closing in your world?